So welcome back to the 13th grade. This lesson we're going to talk about your credit score and really what is the formula that makes up your credit score. Now we're going to talk about credit as a foundational piece of building wealth. This is really important. There's a lot of other ways or systems. If you remember the previous video where we talked about control and ownership, and then we talked about how you can live a life where you're paying down all of your debt, right? So you don't have any debt whatsoever. And then there's this other alternative lifestyle where you can maybe carry debt, but you do that because you're not interested in paying things down because you're just more so worried about the cash flow. If you haven't watched that video, please go back because you really need to understand and make that choice of who you are, either about ownership or about control, before you really set out on your journey of kind of building wealth, because how you do it matters, and that depends again on your risk level. Today we're going to talk about credit score because the credit score is actually what lenders look at when they're considering giving you a loan. It's not credit score alone, but take yourself back to like elementary school where the teacher would give you a grade, A, B, C, D, F, right? Or I guess A, B, C, D, F, and then E if you really flunked out. But the point is that grade wasn't really indicative of the entire semester. It was just kind of snapshot. It was just a quick sort of letter that you could put on to what you did over the course of a year. Your credit score is much like that in the exact same way, and then it's just a snapshot. So if a lender goes in and they generally know that they approve people, let's say with a 680 credit score, they don't know necessarily what's in your credit, but what they know is that generally people with a 680 credit score are going to have these types of characteristics when they actually examine the report. Anyway, so it's important we know exactly what your credit score is. Now, Dave Ramsey does talk a lot, and I do subscribe to this idea that you shouldn't carry tons of debt. But the type of debt matters. So there's this thing called smart debt and sort of dumb debt. We're going to talk about that in the next video because it deserves a sort of entire lesson on it. But the idea is that there's certain debt that is okay to carry and there's certain debt that's not okay to carry. And of course, we're looking to build wealth, so it probably makes sense to you just in general that your smart debt is the debt that you're carrying that's tied to some particular asset that's providing you cash flow or money back to you. So it makes sense that you're carrying that debt because the net of that is a positive, money into your pocket. Bad debt would be something that isn't doing that. So like a credit card would be technically a bad debt, and that you're just simply paying money to the credit card, you're holding something and that's not really paying you anything back because on the credit card you probably brought groceries or shoes or dinner night out or so forth. So it really kind of depends on why you have that debt, if it's a smart debt or a bad debt. So we don't want to work to, as Dave Ramsey says, for him, credit score is not important because he's never interested whatsoever in actually having any kind of debt or needing to go to a lender to take out a loan, because his mindset is I'll pay everything in cash. We, if in going forward in this particular course, are going to talk a lot about using your credit to leverage that to buy assets and then get cash flow. It's sort of a general principle. So we're going to need our credit score as a foundation. Plus, besides, realistically, between me and you, we know that it's pretty hard to actually save up $20,000 or $30,000 to then just go purchase into a vehicle. That most of us, it's going to make sense. We're going to want to take out that auto loan. We're going to want to take out a mortgage. We're not going to buy everything in cash. And if we're going to do that, we're honest with ourselves and say, listen, we're not going to buy cash because we're going to want to purchase and consume, then it is important for us to have a really great credit score because that can mean a lower interest rate. On a car note right now, as it stands, you can get up, into the 3% range on a car note, even into the 2% range, depending on where you are, what you're purchasing. That's pretty big difference than if you have bad credit, which you can actually get into the 8 or even the double-digit mark. Same thing when you're talking about a mortgage. The difference between a 4% interest rate or a 4.5% interest rate over the course of 30 years is pretty great, and a lot of that is indicated off your credit score. So let's talk about it. On a basic level, what is your credit score comprised of? It's really comprised of 5 main components, and again, we'll go into more detail, but just in a general. Payment history, credit utilization, the length of credit, new credit, and types of credit. And the credit score bureaus, and everyone's is slightly different, so don't get hung on the exact percentages, don't get hung on the exact formula calculations, but as a general rule with everything, just get your mind around sort of how your credit score is configured. There is a new credit score that's coming out that's going to add in some additional components to this, where you're going to be able to add in like your rental payments and things like that. At the end of the day, these are still going to be the core components of it, even though if they might switch it a little bit. So as long as you're doing these things good, you're going to have that credit score that lenders love. But simply enough, your payment history is 35% of your credit score. So this is actually a very, very important component, because if it's 35%, then obviously if you mess up on your pay history, you can cause yourself pretty big big damage. Actually, just getting one simple missed payment on your credit report can be completely, a no-go as far as a lender is concerned, because that is the highest sort of risk indicator that you can't make your payments and you can't sort of keep up with that debt, which tells the lender basically that, hey, you may not pay them back. So missing a payment is it's bad. Don't do it. So this is also why overspending and purchasing things that maybe necessarily you can't afford is also very important, to not stress yourself out. And because things are going to come up, you're going to have certain things, medical issues or whatever, emergencies that come up. And if you don't have a nice reserve fund, you're probably going to have to put that in a credit card. It's also important that you don't stretch yourself and max yourself out on spending. Even though if you want to make a purchase and you realize, hey, I can make that payment, well, what happens when that emergency happens and then you really have to add some more to it? Now you're in a state where your cash flow is not right and you're going to miss payment on something. So be very, very conscious of that. But it's not just simply about payment history. If you have one credit card, right, and you're making payments, what that means is you have one card that's reporting to your credit bureau that you're making payments on time. That's not going to be as good as if you have 4, 5, or 6 different cards. So it's kind of an idea of how to build credit. We'll get more into another lesson, but the idea is, I personally, just as an example, I pulled these out of my wallet. I carry about 4 different cards. And I do that for a couple different reasons. Some of that's because of the reward points, but some of it is also because of the payment history. So I'll go into a grocery store and I use one card for that because it offers me better rewards for it. But I also do that because I have a pay to that particular card. Let's just call it my Wells Fargo card. Then if I go purchase online, I might use an American Express, and I do that because now I have a payment going to the American Express credit card, and so forth. So if you're actually set up your bills in a way that you're making multiple payments to multiple cards, you're paying the exact same amount, but that's going to be much better than actually paying on one individual card. And the reason why is because your pay history, which is 35% of your score, is going to look a lot better. Because now you're telling a lender basically is, hey, I can make multiple payments and I can juggle 4 or 5 different cards, and that looks responsible to a lender. Sounds kind of weird, but that's going to be more powerful than only having one single card and putting all your purchases on that one card. So the rule in their pay history is try to get multiple payments, and in addition to that, make sure you're making those payments on time. The next one is credit utilization, and that's 30% of your score to date right now. What credit utilization is if you took the 4 cards as I just put an example to you, let's imagine that each one of those cards were a limit of, let's say, $2,500. So $2,500 times 4 is $10,000. So if I add up all the credit limits, I would say the credit limit of all of those cards is $10,000. If I was using, let's say, $1,000, so I went to the store and I swiped for different various things, so the balance on those cards were $1,000. 1,000 divided into 10,000 would be 10%. So my credit utilization would be 10%. Now that's a key indicator for a lender, because if you're maxed out on your cards, if you've heard that term, which means you're using 100% of your utilization, meaning you have 10,000 available to you and you're using all 10,000, that is an indicator that you're not managing your bills on time. That means you're filling in the capacity of what's available to you. That's a high risk indicator to a lender. So this is why this is so important. If you're only using 1,000 or 2,000, the rule is under 30%. If you're only using a little bit of that, then actually an indicator that you don't necessarily need credit, and then you become attractive to a lender. The rule of thumb is if you look like you need credit, you're not going to get a loan. If you look like you don't need credit, you're going to get a loan, which is why strategically it makes sense not to carry a lot of debt unless you need to, or you do it in a very meaningful way. Again, we'll talk about that later. So credit utilization is almost just as important as your payment history. If you're making all your payments on time, but you're maxed out on everything, making the minimum payments, you still seem very high risk. It's going to be hard for you to get the loan, and your credit score is going to drop. The next one is your length of credit. So this is simple. Imagine if you just met a friend and that friend asked you for $100, right? And you gave him $100, but you felt a little bit, you weren't really sure, right, if they're going to pay you back. But let's say you knew that friend for 20 years and every week or so they borrowed $100 and they gave it back to you. Well, the first time you lent out $100 to somebody and they gave it back to you, you'd be kind of worried, like, are they going to pay me back? I'm not really sure. But if they had done that over and over and over again, and they do that every month or so, and they've done it for the last 10 years, well, you're going to be pretty confident in year 7 or 8. And you're like, listen, I give this guy $100 about every month. Because, for whatever particular reason, they always give it back to me with the interest. I feel pretty good about it. Yeah, sure, I'll do it again year 7, 8, 9, 10, or whatever. And more so, I might even give them more money depending on the situation, right? Well, that's what length of credit history is. Basically, when you're 18 years old, and this is why we say actually getting your credit card right when you're 18 years old is important, because you want to start to build that credit history, because when you're 22, 23, 24, 25, when you want to get a mortgage, having a long credit history of 5, 6, 7 years is important. So the length of credit history just basically means how long have you had credit and how long have you been making on-time payments. If you have a credit card but you never use it, your credit history is really not that important. Yes, it goes in the calculation, but the lenders will actually want to see, we'll see this in the slides here in a minute, they want to see payment history for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. It doesn't even matter necessarily how much, but they want to see a long history of payment history. And what that's saying to them is, listen, yeah, you're juggling all your payments perfectly fine. Yes, you're not maxed out on your credit history, but you've only been doing that for 6 months. Well, I'm not quite sure if I want to give you out that loan. If you've been doing it for 8, 10 years, you have a long history of showing that, then you're going to actually look a lot more attractive to a lender. You're going to have a higher credit score. New credit is an indicator. Really, new credit is about inquiries. So new credit is an indicator that you could be high risk if you're searching for credit all the time. It kind of goes into similar to the credit utilization. If you're always looking for credit, that could just be a red flag to a lender, and really two different things. One, maybe you're applying for credit and you're getting declined for some particular reason. And so you keep trying to apply because you keep getting declined. The lender could say, well, maybe I want to approve you, but I don't quite understand why are these other banks declining you, because if you had gotten that loan, then you would need this one, you wouldn't keep applying. So what are they missing there? So sometimes they'll just sort of deny you outright. The second to that is they're worried about you doing something called layering in, and that's layering in multiple loans. So that's actually a pretty popular thing that we do in real estate. Imagine if you want to go do a real estate deal and you need to come up with 100, 150,000. Well, you could get a bunch of different loans, 4 or 5 different loans for all $20,000, $30,000, and then use all of those combined to then go do that rehab project and do that fix and flip, right? So lenders don't want you to do that, because when they're looking at your credit, they're basing it off your debt to income ratio, basically how much debt you have now, what you're currently paying, what your income is. And if they think they're going to give you $20,000 loan and that's going to increase your debt to income ratio, or increase the amount that you have to pay out by, let's say, $500, well, they don't want you to go take out 5 other loans, because now your payment increases $2,500, and based on their formula, they're looking and saying, well, we don't think you can afford the $2,500. We need those ratios to be right. So lenders will be concerned about you layering in. So they see multiple inquiries, either one or two things are happening. You're applying, you're getting declined, and they don't know why, and that's kind of scares them, because maybe there's something they're not seeing, or maybe it's possibly that you're layering in. In that case, they want to deny you all out. This is why it's important that you actually go and acquire credit when you don't need credit, so then when you do need credit, you actually don't have a bunch of inquiries. As a practice that I do, every year I'll go in and I'll pick up 1 or 2 credit cards early in the year, so that it's 6 months or 7 months down the road before, maybe if I'm trying to go get a mortgage or something, those inquiries aren't necessarily affecting you. So you want to accumulate credit, and you want to build your credit up in times when you don't necessarily need it. And that's very important. Remember what I just said to you earlier? If you don't look like you need credit, they'll give you credit. But if it looks like you need credit, they won't give you credit. So trying to do stuff when you don't need it is important. So the last one is types of credit. And this is important mainly for when you're going out for some loans that might be a little bit odd. So like a mortgage or a car note or something. If you've never had a car note, then the lender's like, if you've seen that you've had a car note before, maybe you've had a lease before, they're more likely to give you a car note. If you've had a mortgage before and you made payments on it, you're more likely to get a mortgage. If you're able to juggle a mortgage, a car note, an unsecured loan, the lenders like to see that nice mix of credit. The reason is there's kind of a rule when it comes into underwriting what lenders look at, and they know that the first thing you're going to sort of back out on if things ever get tough is you're going to stop paying the credit cards. Most of the time, you're going to keep your utilities on, you're going to keep the mortgage or your rent, whatever it is, you're going to keep your car, but you're going to drop everything else. You're going to drop Netflix, you're going to drop your cell phone, you're not going to pay the medical bills, you're not going to pay the credit cards. So the lenders want to see, yeah, if you have a mortgage, that's great, but they realize that you're probably going to pay that, because if you don't pay it, you're getting kicked out, right? If you don't pay your car, they're going to come repo it. So those two things are pretty solid, but lenders want to see that you can juggle a mortgage, a car note, and some credit cards, and potentially even an unsecured loan or a line of credit. They want to see you juggling all of those types of things at the exact same time. Just, logically, if you can make multiple payments to multiple things and you've done that for an extended period of time, you look like a pretty good risk. Of course, if you only have one credit card and you've had a very short period of time, then you look like a bad risk. So let's recap. 30% is credit utilization. Your length of credit is 15%, 10% on new credit, 10% on the types of credit. So the two main things, let's call it 65% of your score, the bulk of it is simply enough. Do you have enough credit in your name, okay? And are you making payments on that particular credit? So as a foundational sort of piece in building credit, what you want to do is you want to make sure you have a couple of, 4 or 5 major credit cards. You want to get the credit limits up as much as possible. We'll talk about strategies, how to do that in another video. And you want to make sure that there's payments going to all of those particular cards. Even if you take one of your cards, if you don't have a lot of bills, let's say you go to eat out on one card, go to McDonald's on this card, go get a soda on that card. It doesn't matter how much the payment is, you just got to make some payment, even if it's $6. So go charge something small and make that payment. And the reason why is you want to see that on-time payment. We're about to show it in the next video. And then, of course, you just want to refrain from trying to go get tons of new credit. You want to get all your credit in a short period of time, maybe when you don't necessarily need it. And then you want to keep your cards open. The worst thing you can do is, if you're not going to use a card for some particular reason, is to close that card out. Because when you close that card out, you're stopping the payment history. And then the last one, types of credit. If possible, you want to carry that card note. You want to have maybe a couple of credit cards that you're using. You want to have a mortgage. You want to have a nice mix.